Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another session with Ask the Expert. Our friend and consultant, Julia, she's going to be going through some interesting material today surrounding freight and how to manage client expectations and the fields that go along with those expectations. So this should be an extremely interesting Ask the Expert session today. We're excited to present this for you. Just so you know, Julia, her company, New Age Financial Consulting, specializes in bookkeeping and accounting support, including the CFO services for large and small businesses, specializing in unique and complex accounting needs for different design firms and showrooms. And she also has comprehensive procurement services for designers and showrooms as well. So with that being said, the last housekeeping item we want to go over to make sure we capture all of your questions is the QA button in your Zoom toolbar. And then that will populate this window here that says welcome to QA. Go ahead and feel free at any time during the webinar to type in your questions there, and Julia will gladly answer. Other than that, that is too far ahead of the game, but we'll get back to that. Julia, if you would like to go ahead and take over, it's all yours.
Perfect. Let me share my screen and do the same thing. Let's make sure. Share my screen. Just confirm, Anthony, that you could see the right screen.
Yep, we're on it.
Okay, perfect. So today's topic, I think it'll be interesting and a little bit more broad in terms of how do we handle freight and really client parts of client expectations, and then the internal reporting on freight. We get asked this topic quite often. And it is interesting, and it isn't necessarily black and white. And I also would say it's not necessarily right or wrong. So it needs to work for you. It needs to work for your firm. So always keep that in mind as we're exchanging information, as I call it. So as Anthony had mentioned, in wherever your Zoom toolbar is, you have your Q&A section. Just throw in questions throughout the session. I do try to get to questions in real time. Actually, I think last week I was so excited about the topic, I didn't do that, but I normally do. So let's actually just start off with some basics. So I'm in my test client, 19th Street. Here I am. It's Mr. Tom Hanks, as some of you may know. He must clearly make me happy, because anytime I look in here, I'm like, oh, here he is again. And so remember, again, this item is invoiced. I don't want to do that. So we're talking about some basics. You have freight as a sales code. I want a non-invoiced item. I could also make a new item, but, and I don't want inventory. Budget, no. Antique, no. First tips, it's returning, but it doesn't matter. Okay. So you have your sales codes. And so remember, Studio comes with actually a really great list of preset sales codes. They're fantastic. You could expand upon them a little bit. And in your sales codes here, you do have freight as an option. So this is a line item. And so what does that mean? So let's actually go look at it to understand really the mapping. We're going to open up both other costs, right click, open it up in another tab, and then open up sales codes, right click, open it up in another tab. And so under sales codes, if you go to freight, how do all these things talk to one another? So sales code as freight as a sales code maps to income freight here and expense freight here. What does that mean? Well, let's actually, I didn't want to do that. Let's go to reports and open up an income statement so we could see what that looks like and why it matters, and really what the differentials are, and some approaches. So let's go to legacy and let's go to income statement. So remember, on your income statement, the top section under income sales, our cash account is mapped incorrectly. Don't pay any attention to that. Under income sales here, these are sales typically related to your items. And the items are mapped to your income statement by your sales code. And so we don't have any freight on here. So actually, let's just look at last year. And so if you're selling a piece of furniture, and you pick the sales code furniture, it goes into here, sales furniture, and the purchase cost, so the cost of goods, goes into cost of sales furniture right here. If you use furniture, and this is what we're going to try to dissect today. So if you use furniture, if you use sales code freight up here, so in the sales code section, it will still go to income freight down here as revenue, and then expense freight down here as cost of sales. And so Studio also comes with 4 other costs. Those are the 4 other costs that are automatically preset also in your system. And those are crate, freight, installation, and other. Those are the 4 that come with Studio. They've actually been around longer than I have. So I've been in Studio since 2007, and they've been in Studio since before me. They are separate and apart on certain parts of reporting in Studio. And so we try to have a higher level conversation when firms come to us to say, okay, how do you bill for freight and what does your contract dictate? Remember, how you bill for freight should be dictated only by your contract. And so we could set up Studio to work around your contract, but I need to understand your contract to make it be utilized effectively. If you are a firm that marks up client contracts across the board, meaning for the most part, your contracts go out with a flat markup. So you're not selling at retail, or you're not selling at retail with a discount. Your contracts are very clear, and they say that all of our projects are marked up, let's say 35%. And so if you're somebody who marks up in that capacity, your client, so we're going to keep that open. Your client, and we'll go to 19th Street, has a preset markup. So remember, if your client has a preset markup and we're under codes, this is where that markup lives, under 35%. Other costs, though, do not automatically take the markup in here. The markup in here is only for your items. So what does that mean? That means if your contracts are consistently 35% across the board, you could then go into other costs and mark up freight as 35% across the board. So this could be entered as 35. As soon as you do this, let's go back into our test item. Actually, we're going to have to make a new test item. So let's make a new item. We're on 19th Street. We're going to go to Pottery Barn. We're going to go to furniture. We'll attach an image. So Tom Hanks is marked up 35%. Sofa. I don't know. Sofa. Beige, is it beige? Beige sofa? Okay. So Tom Hanks is marked up 35% as soon as I enter an item. So this is $39.95. It copied over the selling price, and my markup is automatically 35% here. Because I changed the markup on my freight to be 35% as well, when I go to other costs and I select freight as a drop down, my freight here populated to 35%. However, if you have clients where the markup on a project is inconsistent, or if you are splitting a discount potentially, and then if you're billing somebody flat freight, managing freight in this capacity can be a little bit tricky. So we always say is if you're marking up across the board and it's the same, go ahead and automatically change the freight other costs to have a set markup. And then if you need to override this for whatever the reason, because this particular client negotiated this down, or we're giving them a deal, whatever, et cetera, you could go into each line item and change the markup associated to freight. So that's something to think about. The other thing to also just make note of, and I think understand how you're billing, if you notice too, I already set this up. So we have more than one freight other costs. I also am really particular, and I mean this, I'm particular. I like to use, and we could talk more about this. I like to have my freight always live in other costs. And that's really my own personal preference, just from years of experience. And it has to do with the way information is reported. And so in other costs, if I know that I have some client contracts that have freight at 10%, some client contracts have freight at 15, and let's actually rename this freight at 35 so that it's very clear. So here's my freight at 35. No, I do not. Would you like to save your changes? Nope. Freight at 15 is as you can see, the markup is 15%, and then I have freight at 10. And I'm not even consistent with the way it looks. And this is actually, so this is interesting. So this markup is set to work as a negative percentage amount, because in this particular example, the client contract goes out and it says, my freight, regardless of what my true freight is, regardless of what the vendor is charging me, and the way I presented freight in my contract is I am charging you 10% of the item cost. So I set this up to be a negative percentage so I can automatically compute that. And so what does that mean and what does that look like? So I'm back in my sofa example. This particular sofa was $39.95 and my markup on the item is still 35%. That's what my contract says. And then my total is $53.93.25. This particular contract with Mr. Tom Hanks says that I charge 10% freight across the board, regardless of what the vendor charges me, regardless if there isn't freight. And maybe I would exclude a couple of categories. I would say, okay, I'm going to exclude labor, right? There typically isn't any freight on labor, so I'm not going to charge you 10% on labor. But what I will do is I will charge you 10% on the total selling price on every other item. So in that example, it is really easy to calculate freight. So I have my negative, my freight 10%. To calculate freight as a negative, and it didn't populate, so let's just delete this item and start over. Just for our example, because it should. So I'm going to other costs. I know this freight is a negative 10. I click on it. As soon as I click on it, it tells me that my markup is a negative 90. Why do I do that? Because if I enter my selling cost in here, it'll compute the total at 10% of what this 53.93 is. So then what that alleviates is I don't have to go into a calculator. I don't have to go into Excel somewhere, open it up and say, okay, tell me what 53.93.25 times 10% is. If we set this up as a negative 90, it'll do the math across the board. So it's a really easy and a really great tool. If again, that's how your contract, if that corresponds with your contract. So I also didn't do a good job of updating my deposit percentages, which I will go do and I will fix. And then now here's my deposit of $539.33 for this freight item. And yes, it should be taxable, save and close. So we go back to other costs. I like my deposit percentages filled out because that is an area that taxable, I mean, taxable is hard. A lot of yes, no, it could be a hodgepodge. It'll be both. If you're in California, it depends on final destination. This one is filled out. The way you're setting up all of your codes, and this could be anything, it could be company codes, it could be sales codes, client codes. The goal of the setup is to utilize a scenario of most often, right? So frequently, what are we doing? Are we typically marking freight as taxable or non-taxable? And then I would have your presets equal whatever that is. So if you're typically taxing freight, I would make this taxable. And then if you need to toggle it off, you're always able to override those types of things within your items. So I'm going to do yes here too. Okay, so I finished setting that up. So this is just another really great tool of, will I mark up flat freight? So I'm utilizing other costs. In this particular example, we're doing flat freight of 10%. So we set up an other cost to mimic that. And let's say you have both examples. Let's say you are doing, let's say this, so this actually is 10% of selling price. We really want to be clear because it's a negative 90, 10% of selling total. But then I also just need a regular freight 10%. Not all of my contracts say, let's say that's a new approach of mine and I really like it, but I haven't been able to implement it for all of my contracts. So remember, when I'm setting these up, my income account is always income freight. My expense account is always expense freight. My markup here is just 10%. My purchase deposit is 100 and my selling deposit's 100. I'm going to still say this is taxable, even though those change. I'm going to hit save. So I don't know if this is actually super clear, right? Freight 10% selling total, but as you're working within the software and you know that you have more and more contracts going out, you could also just name this freight 10% selling total new. I don't know, new contract. I mean, this is getting very, very wordy. Remember, anytime you're setting up a new freight cost, especially if you're using other costs, make sure that it's getting mapped to where we just mapped it to, right? So income and expense, because on my income statement here, I very quickly want to understand what am I bringing in terms of income, and then what are my expenses in terms of freight. So those are the two line items I pay attention to. What does that look like on reports, and what happens if you're utilizing then the sales code of freight under the actual item cost? And so this is a great example. So this particular sofa, I don't know, where did it go? It went to, we have an ABC something, 19th storage, tavern. No, we do. We have an ABC. Oh, ABC Ship Solutions. So this sofa was shipped to ABC Ship Solutions. And it's going to live there for a little bit. Beige sofa. To be reupholstered. Item, we're going to give it an item 05A. Okay. So the dining room, or where are we? Dining room or living room? Living room? I don't actually know. Nope. Beige sofa. Bouvet spelled beige wrong. Where did it go? Scared it's gonna bring me so many different things. Weren't we from Pottery Barn? Pottery Barn sofa? Oh, there it is. Oh, it's just called sofa. Beige, oh, this is a description. Oh, okay, great. So let's actually look at a report quick. So what does this particular item look like on a report in terms of other costs and selling prices? So let's put just this one thing on a proposal, and let's go pull a client balance report, because this is where it can get a little confusing. So I love this report. It's a great tool to be able to, not only, it's a client facing report, so you could send it to clients at any point in time. And so we're 19th Street. And what does this proposal look like? So if you notice, this report will break down for a client very, very quickly their total price. So what does this mean? So this is the cost of the item plus the markup. Cost of the item plus the markup. Other cost is its own, is its own column, and then sales tax, and then again another total and a payment and a client balance. So if I start to commingle things in other costs that have nothing to do with freight, creating, installation, and other, a report like this becomes very tricky. And if a client says to you very quickly, they send you an email to say, where are we in terms of project spend? And where are we in terms of freight? You gave me a estimate for the total project of $500,000. You also told me 20% of that would be freight, which is another 100 grand. And so they email you that during the week, and you're supposed to get back to them. If you're really good about utilizing other costs here for true freight, and that could be, in theory, that could be some creating an installation in terms of not installation of like labor installation. But to me, installation more of having to do with receiving and storage fees. You could utilize a report like this. And so if we get rid of this proposal, to tell a client very quickly, where your total price is actually $464,000, and all of your freight, because I know I've been really good about using this column, is $9,000. So we're way under in freight, which can't be the case, but we're way under in freight. We've spent 465 grand. Our sales tax is 19, and here's your total spend, and here's what you owe. But what happens when you have items? So that's great in theory, right? But how do you execute that? And what happens when you have items that don't have a unit cost and just have a freight cost? So if we go back to the same example of the beige sofa, let's actually just clone it, because we want sofa freight, whoops, sofa freight. And we want this vendor to be ABC ship. And I don't know, shipping from warehouse to Holster back to warehouse, sure. And so that was 5. I want to make this 5B. And in this particular scenario, I am going to I have to use a sales code, right? The system prompts me to utilize a sales code here. I can't save an item without it. I'm going to pick freight as a sales code, but I actually will not have a unit cost at all. My report's still up. Let me go to that report quick and filter just by this proposal. Okay, let's keep this one open. So I just have some freight charges. I don't even know if I have a regular freight. I'm gonna use delivery. Because to me, it was still part of, I know that when I presented this budget, my $500,000 spend and my $100,000 freight budget also included third-party delivery fees. So I'm gonna say that to get this from the warehouse to the upholsterer back to the warehouse was $595. $595. It's getting marked up by my project markup of 35%. My deposit percentage of my PO is 100. It's non-taxable. I'm going to hit save and close. And I actually want to add it to that same proposal. So now if we go back to this type of report, and we're running this we didn't run this as first component, so we didn't turn first component on right here. And so when I look at this, whether I look at it as first component or I roll up all of my components, the client could very clearly see that the unit cost, right? So the cost of the item is still $5,400 and my other costs were $1,342 and my sales tax and my total. So in this example, even though I could have, there was nothing wrong with me putting freight into here, into the top line, and freight into here. And so if you take it out of here, there's nothing wrong with that, but just understand, right, that then you're commingling. So we're going to look to see what that looks like. Let me make sure I did all my math. Okay, should be good. Jody, that's actually a really great question. So hold on, I'll get to that in 1 second. And so now if you look at this, so even though this says freight and the sales code that we're using is freight, because we're not utilizing other costs, the total gets a little bit skewed. Again, not right or wrong, but just more difficult to, I would say, report on. So if that's something that you think either works for you, or let's say you are very good about communicating with the client their total spend and their projected freight, utilizing other costs in that capacity may be really helpful for you to understand very, very quickly where you are with total spend. Can you still extrapolate this information in a different way? Yes, absolutely. So you would be able to, you could even run it, right? You could run a 2010 report. You could add sales codes into here. I don't think I have one set up that way. Sales codes. Sales codes are great just so you, oh, actually, hold on. We need to set it up in the filter. And we're going to do this very, very quickly. So the question 2 was, well, what happens when there's multiple items that are shipping together? My answer to that would be, well, it depends on really how you report or how you want to see information on a report and how do you communicate with the client. So for 19th Street, and we're in our dining room. I have multiple 19th Street set up, meaning multiple dining rooms set up. But so we're in our dining room. And so I decided to, in this ABC ship example, I was able to extrapolate what just the sofa freight was. But let's say this particular ABC ship also sent me, I'm going to clone it. They also sent me a bill for a large amount of items that are getting shipped, whether they're getting shipped from the warehouse to the client's home or from the warehouse to the upholsterer. Almost doesn't matter, right? So I'm going to say freight and storage. What was last month? April 2024. And so this isn't tagged to any particular item. And if that's the case, I don't know if I have a throughout in here, whole house. I don't. You could absolutely set up a room that's for freight if you were tracking your budget that way. You could also do throughout as a popular, oh, room list is 19th Street. Throughout is a popular room name. It's a great catch-all. Whole house we see a lot. And so then I'm utilizing room. I put throughout, it's my first item, it's my component. But the process of utilizing the sales code versus the other costs, that stays the same. I'm going to take it out of unit cost. We're actually going to, maybe we'll make a couple of these. I'm going to throw it into here and I'm going to say this was, I don't know, $29.95, $29.95. My markup is 35% and it's not taxable because it's third party. Let's look at this in item details. So I had the ability. Is this what I just did? Items, furniture, no. $29.95, 20, where am I? ABC ship. Oh, I'm in my dining room. So I had the ability to put it into my sales code freight, but I decided not to because I'm really trying to understand what my other costs are for the entire job. Oh, yes, we could definitely walk through that. There's a really great question about the negative 90%, which I understand can be a bit confusing. But let's say we're not necessarily great about tracking our freight in our other cost column. How else can you find that answer? I mean, you absolutely could, right? So we were in our report builder. Sometimes these custom reports could be a bit wild. Did we add sales code? We did. So I pulled a project worksheet. It's always my standard go-to in terms of any type of reporting. And so I pulled my project worksheet by room. And I'm going to go to 19th Street. And I want to see my sales code because what that's going to show me, sales code is, let's say I'm not sure. If you're like, oh, this is a great thought, but I don't know what I've done in the past. I have no idea. Okay. So freight sales code here is showing to me, well, where did I use this box? Where's my $29.95? Where did I use my sales code freight? And so it's showing me that I used it on this item, but what it's not telling me is that this $29.95 is still living in other costs. So what we would potentially want to do is, even in a report like this, still go into specify data and then add other costs for both selling and purchase side. And again, I'm doing this quickly. Now I don't know which one I did. Super great on my part. Hold on. Let's do, so that's other cost purchase. So we'll go PO. Whoops. We can put it here, I guess. I don't know if this would be my ideal scenario, but I'm just trying to, oh, well, selling. And these are really long. I don't like when they look really long. Selling other costs. Let's go to save. Let's go to that same report again. Let's go to 19th Street and let's go to freight. Just so we could understand, okay, well, how do we even get to the bottom line of this? So then here I'm able to say, okay, I've used freight as a sales code multiple times. Here are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But in addition, there have been times where I've used the sales code freight, but I actually wound up putting the total purchase and the total selling into the other cost option. So how you manage freight overall, right, would dictate what we're doing with the report like this and really how we set it up. So if you're good about the, where's our report that shows other costs? Probably a million of them open. But if other costs have consistently been used, I mean, and again, you could always do a double check like this anyway. But this, extrapolating it this way is so much easier than then having to go through an entire project report to say, oh my gosh, when have I also used freight as part of sales codes instead of other costs? So this was a tool of getting us to understand. Remember too, if you've invoiced items in this scenario, you're not going to be able to fix it. Meaning you could void your invoices and redo your process, but I don't necessarily, like, I wouldn't recommend that. I would try to have you be as efficient as possible and just implement this strategy moving forward. So somebody asked about that 90% freight, right? And really to explain it a little bit better and how does it work and walk through the process of it again. So let's just go back into, so not into this item. Let's actually get out of ABC. So we were in our, yeah, so Jody, that's also another great question. So what if you use other costs for things such as labor, fiber protection, et cetera? I mean, so yes, that is, I would say, very, very common. This approach, or what you're saying, isn't uncommon. I actually think it's more uncommon to be in the habit of making sure that other costs are clean. But if you can get into that habit, again, it's extremely helpful. So what happens, so the question is, what happens if you're using other costs for things such as, we see cut fees in there a lot, fiber protection, labor. So in theory, you would need to work around, you would need to work through your process a little bit more to then be able to say, okay, all of those things really have nothing to do with freight. They don't need to be another cost. You could utilize either components for them, or you could just make new items and they don't necessarily need to be a component B or C of something. They would just still be a component A. So let's actually just do some examples. So where were we? Were we in our living room? I don't remember. No, we were not. We were definitely in our dining room. So here's our dining room. Here's the sofa again. This particular sofa has a 10% cost. Okay, so in this example, this contract, this client contract. So remember, everything should start with your client contract. How do you bill for freight? And if it's not necessarily clear in your client contract, I think it's a great time to take a step back and say, okay, where does it make sense for me? And do you know if you're making money on freight? And then whether that's a yes or no answer is where we go digging into Studio to say, well, let's look at our reports to understand, are we making money? Are we not? And how are we tracking it? And then let's say we did that, and our new contract with Mr. Tom Hanks says that we are going to bill a flat freight. Our flat freight is 10%. Now that is a low number, but just for this, well, let's do 20% because that's not set up in other costs. We're going to bill 20% on the selling price of an item. What is considered the selling price? The selling price is the subtotal of the item of the selling side plus the markup equals the total. So this number does not include sales tax. So, and that is what our contract is aligned with that. Our contract says we will bill 20% of the total price, not including sales tax, and that 20% is flat across the board for items that have to be shipped. So if something is wallpaper installation, there is no freight associated with that item. So we wouldn't, that item would be excluded from the flat freight model. So we have this new contract and we need to set up other costs. We go into other costs, we go into settings, we open them up, we right click, and here's all of our other costs. There's quite a bit in here. Cut fee is in here. I don't like that personally. And click on the blue button, and the blue button says new other costs. And I'm going to set up freight 20%. I want to call it something that's clear. Total selling new. I don't know, new contract. New contract. And so my income account is still freight. I want everything on my income statement to be very, very clear. My expense account, still freight. So here's my expense account freight. And here's my markup. So if you are in the process of setting up flat freight, you could utilize a negative percentage to capture that. So if you're doing 20% of the total, this number could be a negative 80%. And I'll show you the example. And so here's purchase deposit 100, selling deposit 100. I've been making all of these taxable, but that's definitely a gray area. And save. Go back into your item, and this is the same item. Let's try to find a new item. So, here's another sofa. This is the same sofa. It looks the exact same. Here's our freight. That's where we were utilizing unit price. Here's a dining chair. Okay, let's duplicate this dining chair. So we needed to order more of these. And now we actually ordered these from Michael Smith out of Jasper. Here's our price. And so this is now under our new client contract. It's 20% freight. So what does that mean? So regardless of what my purchase price is here, my purchase price will still be true to what the vendor is charging me. So in a flat freight situation, our purchase cost should reflect what the vendor is charging, and that should be accurate with all the vendor documentation. And we will need to do an analysis to say, okay, if we're doing 10% flat freight, what does that look like on our income statement? Are we making money? Is that enough? If we're doing 20%, it usually is enough, but sometimes you'll get, I would say, client pushback on that because that's a larger number. But so this contract went out at 20%. They didn't give us any pushback. And so I want to utilize the negative percentage in other costs. How do I do that? So here's my total price. I go to other costs. Oh, this is delivery. Let's delete this. Sorry, we duplicated these items. Save and close. Let's go back. Other costs. I'm going to pick my new freight and freight 20% total selling new. And I'm going to click on other. As soon as I do that, my negative 80% populates. Because in this example, we had told the client we would charge 20% of whatever this total is. This total right here, it's grayed out, but I'm circling it with my mouse, 6844.50. So instead of utilizing a calculator for 6844.50 times 20%, I'm able to set up a freight other costs where the markup is just a negative 80%, which is the exact same math as taking the total selling times 20%. And so I entered my selling price here. This is manual. I still had to type in 6844.50. This negative 80% populated on its own. The 100% deposit populated. And again, I made this taxable in my fake example. And now I'm able to very quickly say to the client, on the 6844, $1,300 is sales tax. And I go save, I said sales tax, but I meant freight. And my dining chairs are way out of order. So hold on. So this is 6. We can make this 3B, I guess. 3B. Well, really wouldn't be 3B, but we're going to say reorder. Reorder. So that's a way to utilize the negative markup percentage for flat freight. That was a question. There was a question about that somewhere. Another question was, what do you do when you have when you really have been commingling other costs for things such as labor, fiber, protection, etc.? So let's even use our chairs as an example. So we have our dining chairs reorder. Well, actually, it would be associated with the fabric. Do we have any fabric in here? Oh, fabric for gray sofa. So let's make this a fabric. Let's clone this and let's actually make this a fabric for dining chairs. I didn't mean to have caps lock on. I have no concept of where we are with item numbers. So your item numbers and components are another tool of how you present information to the client and how you utilize components. So Jasper dining chairs reorder. Sofa dining chairs. 3B, 3A, 4A. Where's my dining fabric for dining chairs? So let's actually just make this 5A and 5B. 5A, oops. 5, I don't know why I made it. I don't know what I was doing. 5A and then fabric for dining chairs. Let's make this 5B. I wonder if they're in the same room or if one is in one room list and one is in another room list. $5A. No, 19th Street. Okay, good. So let's go to dining room. Oh, we're only in dining room 19th Street. Oh, that's great. So here's 5A and 5B. Nope. Where's sofa freight? Where's my fabric? Oh, so this is ABC sofa freight. Okay, so that should not be 5B. Oh, that's also 5A. Ah. Okay, let's make this 6A. Is there a 6? No. Okay. So 6A. Where's my sofa freight? Sofa freight, 6B. Okay, that way it falls to the bottom so I can be clear on what I'm doing. Okay, So now I have these dining chairs and this fabric, here's 5A, 5B, and Kravet is charging me a fiber protection. And so the question is, well, I used to always add fiber protection into other costs. If I'd like to use other costs for freight only, what do I do with the fabric fiber protection? You can make it a component, right? So now that Kravet is 5B, and so you could clone the item. This would be fabric for dining chairs. Fiber protection. This would be 5C, now that I finally got my numbering correct. This is not square yards. I don't know. I'm pretty sure the price for fiber protection is each, but I could be wrong. I'm gonna make this $250, $250. It doesn't have any freight. Actually, we're just gonna delete that item. And so here's this item. Okay. So now I have 5A, 5B, 5C. And so what do I want this to look like in terms of client information? So I'm going to throw all of these on one proposal. I'm going to PDF it because it just makes it a little bit easier. So here's proposal image left. How do you typically utilize item numbers and components? So if I don't select first component, all of my components are visible to a client. So I'm going to see that the dining chairs reorder is 5A, that the fabric is 5B, and that the fabric for dining chairs is 5C. I could absolutely present it to the client in this capacity, or I could also decide to roll up everything that's above and beyond component A, and it will just show the dining chairs, including the fabric, including everything associated with this new total of $92.87.19. Let's say I wanted the client to see the fabric, but not to see fiber protection. So remember, we have a 6A already in here. That now needs to become 7A. I'm doing a stellar job numbering today, because I want the client to be able to see the fabric, but I don't want them to see the fabric for dining chairs. I'm going to number the fabric 6A. And then I'm going to make the fiber protection 6B. And then when I'm presenting this, the client is not going to see the fiber protection as a standalone, but they still will see fabric. And I go to PDF. I'm going to go to first component. I actually like proposal image left. I'm very drawn to that. And now the client's able to see the total for the fabric, regardless of what else we lumped into there. And then they're able to see the dining chairs standalone as well. So because we have more than one freight, other costs, this is breaking it down for them down here as well. So just remember that, make note of that. I mean, in theory, I think we wouldn't necessarily be switching how we charge freight in the middle of a proposal. So that's just unusual a bit. And then, and if we take it off, right? So, and then here's all the detail. So that is your workaround. Again, remember, there's no right or wrong. It really does depend on how you want to see information and how you want the client to understand total spend as well. The client total balance report is a very easy tool to use with the client, again, as long as the report is clean, to be able to say to them, we have one open, I think, right? How much have we spent in total? And what was our, oh, we actually don't have one open. And what was in our other costs. The other thing that you could do though too, and so we've certainly done this in places where they're not necessarily great about other costs, but we do like the idea of understanding freight, especially from a client perspective. And so I will do the same thing. So I'll go to client total balance. I'll filter by 19th Street. I would typically probably take out, I would look through this to say what items are real, what items aren't. I would exclude by budget items. I would exclude maybe items that are not on a proposal, but let's assume that all of that is correct. I would export this. I would export this into Excel. And if a client did email me today to say, I really need to know what my total spend is and what my freight costs are. And then I would take this report and work through it to say, okay, well, in this other cost column, how else can I break this down for them? But I don't ever want that to be a manual process, because this, what I'm doing right now, really would be a manual process. And I'd have to go through each one of these to understand what was in here. And so I'm always looking to avoid that. And what we have just found works really well is if we are really good about making sure that anything related to freight goes into this column, we can extrapolate that information much quicker. I think a follow-up to the same sort of conversation is, okay, well, what do you do with everything related to a third party, right? So a warehouse. And so in addition to utilizing freight, think about the fact that there's inbound freight and there's also third-party freight, right? And then there's receiving and storage costs. And where do you want receiving and storage costs? Again, not only to populate for a client in terms of client expectations, but where do you want them to live on your income statement? So I don't remember what's in our other costs. So we have a delivery fee. And on our income statement, I don't think we have anything that calls out like warehousing. I don't think so. So you could do a number of things. You can create yet again other cost if you'd like, or you could expand upon delivery. Oh no, delivery is new, right? So because studio is freight, creating, installation, and other. So somebody in here already went in and created delivery. And so delivery is still mapped to income freight and expense freight. But is that enough detail for you on an income statement? I would really say it depends on your volume. So if you are utilizing that receiving warehouse for everything and anything for all projects, and you really want to understand where you are in terms of revenue, of course, but also markup, right? What does your contract dictate that you will be charging for that third-party warehouse? Are you at a 10%? Are you 20%? Or if the contract goes out at 35, are you at 35? That would then be another dictation of, okay, well, how do we want to track it? So if you wanted to live in other costs, which you obviously can do, so this could become delivery, storage, and receiving. We could call it third party so that we're very clear. Whoops. Our income account, I don't want it commingled with freight. So I'm going to make that a standalone. I'm going to make it income, warehousing and delivery. Hopefully that's clear enough. Delivery. I'm going to rename them later. My type is an expense. Oh, no, it's not. My type is an income. And my code is an income miscellaneous. Nope, income sales. And then my markup, oh no, and my expense account is the same. I like my wording to be the same, warehousing and delivery. So it's expense, I think I put warehousing and delivery. And so this will then populate, I'm going to just use the number 2, expense, and cost of sales. Let's do our markup at 10% just for right now, 100%, and then 100% here. So this will allow us to very quickly and easily track our delivery, storage, and receiving fees. But again, it's part of other costs. Does that work for you? Does that not work for you? If it doesn't, you could also absolutely make a sales code. Let's look at what our sales codes say for third-party delivery. And I will say, I think we see often enough that third-party warehousing can live in its own room, because that is very, very helpful for the same reason that we've been talking about, for reporting. So when we pull our client total balance or any of our project reports, Studio automatically subtotals everything by room. So if you have we have our room throughout. Oh, we do have whole house. That's funny, I looked for it. So now I didn't do a good job, right? I made a room throughout, but I really should have used whole house. And so then when I pull any type of project report, I'm going to get frustrated with myself because I've duplicated efforts and I now need to combine these two from a budgeting standpoint. Has Studio, sorry, just a question. Has Studio thought of adding a field for freight that is in every item? We can add 0 if there isn't any, or fill in a 20% as a default. Then the other costs can be left for other costs. That's actually a really great suggestion. I mean, I could certainly double check with them. So remember too, the studio of other costs and freight, creating, installation, and other is from the original, I would say, Studio Desktop model. And in Studio Desktop, you couldn't change freight, crating, installation, and other. Those just were what they were. And I really do think at that point in time, our users were utilizing items for everything and anything. So do I think that there could be a potential better solution for freight? Absolutely. Another question, if you don't tax freight, but you do tax the markup, is that something you could do in other costs, or is that just something you could do in the items? That is something that I would say, yes, you should be overriding in the item. So if you're back in our item screen, and remember, other costs, just like sales codes, have a taxable, non-taxable. So you could toggle this, you could make this none, or you could toggle this yes or no. We always recommend toggling it to whatever scenario you find is most applicable to your firm. So if you're typically taxing other costs, make this yes. If you're typically not taxing this, make this no. And then when you're in your item screen, it is definitely up to the user to still make sure that these taxable toggles are correct. And I don't know why this says no. So we have our selling costs, we have our markup, and then what are we doing with third party? So right in California, third party freight is taxable depending on where the item is going. In New Jersey, third party freight is just non-taxable across the board in its entirety. So the third freight here, so other costs, the taxable toggle is yes or no right here. I would say remember that, because I think it is overlooked. It is overlooked often. So if you find that that's the case in your office, make sure you toggle this to yes, and then you're at least hopefully taxing it correctly more than taxing it incorrectly. So we talked about setting up delivery, storage, and receiving as third party and other costs, but you could also have that be a sales code, and I'm looking to see if we have it. Doesn't look, we have an office expense, that makes logical sense. It doesn't look like we do, and so you could set it up in your sales codes as well. I don't remember what we called it already. So delivery and receiving. And then from a budget standpoint, if you did that and you were good about using delivery and receiving, and you wanted it to use as the sales code, you would then, an easy way to manage it would be to throw it in a room. And then anytime, I don't know why this report is so short. Anytime you run a client total balance report and you scroll to the bottom, you'd be able to tell a client very quickly, again, your total was $475. You paid $15,000 in freight. You also have a room in here called delivery and third party. And part of that $475 that you paid to us also had $50,000 of third party delivery fees. So that's another way. So remember, rooms are a great budgeting tool. And you could play with rooms, you could play with the way rooms appear, you could play with the order of the way rooms appear. You could obviously decide what to put in and out of rooms, but it really is a tool, in my opinion, for a great tool for reporting, because it allows you that flexibility and it allows you very quickly to extrapolate information. So that's another way of managing those third-party charges that could potentially work for your office as well. We're pretty much up against the hour. There were some really great questions today, Anthony. I hope it was informative.
Absolutely.
I do think that like I mentioned at the beginning, it is a topic that should be dictated not only by your client contract, but just really remember, not necessarily a right or a wrong. It really is all process driven, and whatever works best for your office and whatever the office really can stick to, right, follow through on. And then how are you then going to report on that information and that process once it's implemented?
Absolutely. All right, so I'm going to share with the last few minutes
Okay.
that we have left, the Julia's contact information here, and also our contact information. If you have any questions, or you have um you have an immediate need to find a solution on figuring out something to do, by all means, use our chat bot. It is powered by the wonderful Chat GPT, and it scans our entire knowledge base and pulls up the relevant information. This is a relatively new improvement to our chat bot, but it is powered by AI, which is hugely popular nowadays. So you can either access that within the help center, or you can click the little chat bubble down at the bottom right of your screen. Julia's information is here as well, Julia at newagefinancialconsulting.com, her phone number and her website. So if you have any questions for her, by all means, you're more than welcome to reach out to her. With that being said, thank you again for joining us on our weekly Ask the Expert. We will catch you all next time, and we hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Anthony. Have a good week too. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, take care, Julia.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.